Tell us a little bit about the origins of the project.
The origins of the project are actually the dramatic growth in Santa Clara County that started in the early 70s, driven by the advent of far more sophisticated semiconductors. And I had a relationship with a Prudential Insurance Company that started in '73 with a project in Sunnyvale called Moffett Park. And we had some dramatic success with taking a project that had been lying fallow since the early 60s and turning it around by changing its subdivision and its marketing. At the same time, I had met Joe Keenan and Nolan Bushnell, who were the founders of Atari, and in late 75, early 76, joined their board of directors and was also handling all of the company's real estate. And they were going from a 50, 75 person organization in 74 or 5 located in Los Gatos and Campbell to a several thousand person operation located in Moffett Park in '76. And at that same time, Intel, American Micro Devices, and others were growing rapidly in Santa Clara County. At the same time, there was no housing being built anywhere in the Bay Area to speak of, and access to employees was a tremendous exercise. We used to have monthly job fairs on a Saturday afternoon in the parking lot of Atari's headquarters, and we would get several hundred, and sometimes as much as 300 or 400 younger people out on these Saturday functions. We have beer and wine and, and food, and we use them for recruiting. And basically we had our personnel department track the zip codes of every person who showed up and track the ongoing zip codes of new employees to see where they moved, etc. And very quickly, this showed that something, I can't remember the exact number, but it was 75 or 80% of these people were coming from Santa Clara, from Alameda County, and in many cases from the Tri-Valley area. So that led us to, in '76, '77, to do the Oak Creek Business Park in Milpitas, and shortly thereafter, which was a 300 gross acre project, and shortly thereafter, the Town Center Business Park, also in Milpitas, which was a couple hundred acres. And frankly, we went through the Oak Creek project so quickly that by '78 it was obvious we were going to be out of most of our land when we were just completing the subdivision improvements. And on that basis, Prue and I had hired an economic firm by the name of Gruen and Gruen in '77 with the idea in mind that we needed to find a major location in the Bay Area where we could get access to existing employees within a 30-minute commute. And we looked at up and down 101, down into South Santa Clara County, all over 880, all the way up into the North Bay, frankly. And very quickly, using the Journey to Work tapes that Caltrans and the MTC collect on a regular basis, it became obvious that the only location in the entire region where you could get the access to that broad a level of employees was the Tri-Valley. That led us to 580, 680. 580 was just hardly improved west of 680. The interchanges at Hop Yard and Santa Rita were old farm interchanges. There was no interchange at
Stonehenge?
at Stone Ridge in 680, no overcrossing at West Las Positas in 680, etc. And frankly, Hacienda, the land, there's about 1,000 gross acres in the Hacienda project, and during the winter, in heavy winters, about 400 acres in the center of it was underwater. But anyway, we started assembling Hacienda in 78, and started the first subdivision of the first phase, which was basically the lands just north of Hop Yard and Stone Ridge, and across to west to Santa Rita, at where the West Las Positas intersection is today, and including the 60-acre piece which the hospital, the Valley Memorial Valley Care Hospital System headquarters and main hospital are located on. We opened the first part of that subdivision in '82, and we had a legal challenge by a local group, which resulted in a referendum in '83, and we elected to take the gamble when they challenged us in '82 and proceed with the Phase 1 600-acre subdivision, which included all the flood control improvements that you see today. We went 5 miles down the Arroyo Mocho and the Rio de Laguna all the way to the bridge at Burnell, and opened up that major flood channel and dropped the 100-year flood elevation in North Pleasanton by over 4 feet. So, when they ultimately referended us the first time, we had already opened up Stone Ridge to Las Positas from Hop Yard to Santa Rita, and had been able to attract AT&T on a major relocation out of San Francisco, again, just simply based on their zip code analysis of where their employees were coming from. It's hard to imagine this, but in '78, Pleasanton had 35,000 residents. It had only 6,000 jobs, and most of which were various forms of government, hospital, etc. And the Tri-Valley had 160,000 residents, and my recollection's a little fuzzy on this, but it was like 40,000 employees in the entire community. Dublin wasn't incorporated, San Ramon wasn't incorporated, Danville wasn't incorporated. The only incorporated cities in the Tri-Valley at the time were Pleasanton and Livermore. So, anyway.
Let me take you back to that sort of 78 to 82 period.
Mm-hmm.
In scouting this out, you had to be aware of the development politics already going on.
Yeah.
What kind of preparation do you make to deal with that?
Well, first of all, we developed a little newspaper that we started publishing late in '79, that we direct mailed to every resident in Pleasanton. And it's interesting, the Livermore Labs is a primary function is nuclear design, bombs, and energy. And that there were a group of those engineers and related family from the lab that had been the source of most of the environmental and anti-project turmoil in the Tri-Valley going back into the '60s. And we knew that group was there, and so we did everything we could to prepare ourselves for the fact that they would challenge us. We also did extensive polling of registered voters and looked at a couple of challenges to other projects earlier, and pretty much saw that, as is often the case, the vast majority of community people did not support the activists. The problem then, the problem now is that's still a pretty common condition in most communities, but getting people out to vote is the trick. So recognizing that, as I said, we started the newspaper action. We had a bunch of community functions out in the project area starting in '80. We used to have a tent and a band and that sort of thing in an effort to get, good contact with a broad base of the community. At the time, the Pleasanton uniquely had a very strong pro-business city council, and who were dedicated to the concept of developing the community in a professional fashion. And that was something that we figured out early on also. So we did a lot of outreach.
Now, and I understand that you worked pretty closely with city authorities to make the project as suitable as possible for the community.
Well, we always felt that when you're dealing with 1,000 acres, that you needed to have a mix of zoning. In other words, one of the problems in California is that the general plan and zoning process that's evolved in the state has a great deal of rigidity, and they generally try to separate uses widely. And if you look around the country, starting in the late 60s, the integration of higher density residential and commercial and industrial uses have become a much more common practice. And so when we first started, our first plan that we first submitted to the city late in '79, which was more of a sketch, an overall sketch, had extensive residential in it in the southern roughly third of the project area. And when the various people anti-project started to get involved in that, they were totally against the housing side of it. And so, and we knew that they were going to at least referend us, if not sue us and referend us. So as the first approval, which occurred in '81, occurred, we took out a lot of that. At the same time, Prue and I started investing a considerable amount of time, money, and contact in an effort to realign the BART extension into the 580 right-of-way, because it came off of 580 to the west of the San Ramon Dublin Boulevard interchange, west of 580 680, went underground for a stretch, went under 680, came back up in downtown Pleasanton, and then followed the rail alignment out to Livermore, and then looped back to the to 580 at Greenfield Road. And frankly, with the amount of tunneling and stuff that was involved in that, we knew that there was never going to be a BART extension to the Tri-Valley, because there was no way you could afford it. So we worked with Caltrans to modify the 238 and 580 interchange, which was then in the design phase, and to get BART, the track to the Tri-Valley, under 238 and into the 238 right-of-way, and then under the 580 238 interchange and into the right-of-way all the way to Pleasanton. And what we learned was that since BART's inception, the Tri-Valley area and several other areas in the Bay Area that participated in the BART extension had been paying for it through a tax override on their property taxes, but had never had the benefit. So we were able to leverage that with a plan that cost about 20% of what the approved plan was. We were able to leverage that into the 580 alignment, which finally, even though that alignment was approved in '84, the actual BART opening of the station, the East Pleasant to Dublin station, didn't occur until '95. But anyway, it's here now, so.
So you were closely involved in managing Hacienda until the late 80s, was it?
Yeah, early '90s, yeah, right.
And then stepped away to work on other projects.
Yeah, I mean, basically, starting in '87, '88, we had the Carter administration had passed a change in the federal regulations dealing with the use of insured savings in banks and savings and loans, and enabling the investment of those monies through ventures by the lending institution with private developers. The concept being that one of the reasons we'd had such a terrible inflation in the 70s was we had our system was set up so that we restrained the availability of capital. And we had trillions of dollars sitting in these savings accounts drawing nominal interest. Why not invest them? And basically it wasn't a bad concept. It's just that it didn't go far enough in governing how it was invested. So starting in '80, we had all these, one of the things that's always protected the commercial development industry is that the entry cost is so high. You have to have so much capital, you have to have such an extensive organization and therefore extensive overhead that it limits the ability of people to get in the industry. So the result was you had a largely private industry that was capital driven and very professional. So, 80, you take that lid off and all of a sudden all over the country, but particularly in California and Arizona, you had all these savings and loans pop up with these aggressive developer projects, and had a bunch of guys who'd never built anything, and in many cases weren't even in the industry. They'd come from the mortgage side, all of a sudden popped up as developers. So by 85, 86, just in that short time, you had, I think the numbers are $800, $900 billion of commercial development around the country, something like half of it in California and Arizona. And also on the land development side in residential, sitting around, unleased, unsold, and so first thing that happened was Reagan and a gentleman by the name of Rostakowski from the House of Representatives, and chairman of the House Banking Committee, I think he was, changed the tax law in '86 radically, changing the way pre-development risks were treated. And so basically putting Wall Street in the development business broadly. And the second thing that happened was the mess with the S&Ls continued to worsen. And so they formed what became known as FERIA and the RTC to take over all of these various S&Ls, and mostly S&Ls, a few local banks around the country, and cram them down. So starting in '88, '89, a group of Texas guys who had jumped into the pot called the Bass Brothers showed up in Hacienda and all over California, where they had federally funded debt at 25 cents on the dollar and a way below interest market interest rate. And, and so all of us who were out there with our normal private development were faced with having to chase transactions against these deals. And the amount of money involved was almost $1 trillion around the country, but it was disproportionately in California and Arizona. So I ended up having to stop what I was doing on a broad basis and deal with working my way out. My development entities and I had 200 million or something of short-term, unsecured, generally personally guaranteed debt. So I needed to work off that, and it took me until '93 to get it done and pay everybody. So I couldn't take the time to stay involved in the day-to-day activity in Hacienda.
Very interesting. Okay, I think I certainly got enough to work with here. Plenty to work with here.
Right.
Are there any last bits that you want to add? Anything that you think is important for people to hear about the park?
Well, I think, the
said.
vision that Prue and I had was to, there were all kinds of funny things going on in the late 70s. In 78, you had Prop 13, which put an artificial cap on property tax. And the property tax, the local share of property tax, had been the source of infrastructure funding for cities and counties. And basically, the property tax was, 2% plus overrides, voter mandated overrides, became 1%, and voter mandated overrides were restricted. So overnight, the ability of local communities to fund infrastructure went away. That was followed up in 79 or 80 with a thing called Prop 4. And Prop 4 said that if a community had a dramatic escalation in its property tax revenues, despite Prop 13, they had to return the money to the voters. So what we had a local election in '81 that, after much ruckus amongst the private development side, we managed to stop some of the commercial guys from fighting it, and we passed an override on Prop 4, which enabled the city to accumulate the money. And we used that money initially to build the 4 major sports gyms or 3 major sports gyms that are at the 3 major middle schools in Pleasanton.
Now, is this separate from the money raised through the improvement district?
Totally nothing to do with it.
Okay.
This is Prop 4 money. The improvement district encumbered 1,500 acres in North Pleasanton, and it put $300 million worth of infrastructure improvements in place. Again, it did all the flood control, it did the Hacienda interchange, it did the Stone Ridge interchange, it did the Hop Yard interchange, it did the Santa Rita interchange. That was all funded privately and secured against the developable property in the North Pleasant Improvement District. So that was separate. And anyway, no, the Prop 13, Prop 4 exercise was about keep in mind that in 78, Pleasanton had $1 billion of assessed value. It had $300,000 of sales tax revenue. They were after Prop 13, they were turning off street lights. Any parks were being maintained by the users because the city had no park and rec district, nothing. So the last time I checked, and it's been a while, the city's assessed value was in the 20 billion range, and their sales tax revenue was 37 million. And actually, the city's budget in 78, 79 was $1 million. Their budget last year, I think, was 84 million. So what Prue and I were trying to do is put together, we built a fire protection water system in Pleasanton by the way we hooked everything together and put all these different pump stations in. That's second only to San Francisco's. And that was part of the improvement district, and it didn't just serve the North Pleasant Improvement District, it serves the whole community. So what we were trying to do, because Pleasanton, has 16 or 17 or 18 square miles, and the general plan in the late 70s had a build-out population of 106,000. What we were trying to do was provide an infrastructure that would support an integrated residential and commercial development so that you could not have people driving from all over East Jesusville to get to work. But unfortunately, because in '92 we had a big change in the council, and we had controlled growth, but the controlled growth enabled 750 units a year on the average, right? Down to, for a long period of time, we're doing 50 to 100 units. So when I started Hacienda, the average home price in Pleasanton was $100,000. Last year, the average home price in Pleasanton was $900,000. And that's largely because of scarcity. You shut down residential housing from '92 until recently, and frankly, things are so expensive here now that you're not seeing guys rushing in to build stuff in Pleasanton. So you've got a large vacancy in Hacienda, you've got a large vacancy in commercial generally, and the reason is your costs now are as high as many parts of Santa Clara County. You don't have the housing supply that you had to start with, and the commute situation, you don't have the benefits. And so if we'd been able to stick with a plan, we'd have a much better place than we have today. And, it's unfortunate. So what it says is that taking the risk of private development, trying to build a broad-based community infrastructure, if you can't maintain the political support for a long-term program, then you're speculating in a fashion that doesn't make sense.